Welcome to another crossover episode of the Locked On Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Wade with the Locked On Hawkeyes, and I'm joined by Tanner Nessel of the Locked On Badgers. And we are here today to give you a fantastic preview of the Big Ten Men's Conference Tournament that is going to be taking place tonight. All right, so we're recording this a day in advance, but we're going to be talking about, tomorrow or basically tonight's games and talking through kind of what our predictions are for the conference tournament with a little bit more of an emphasis on the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Wisconsin Badgers for all of you dedicated listeners. Tanner, thank you for joining me today. I'm starting to enjoy these crossover episodes. It's kind of fun to bounce ideas off each other. How are you doing today, though?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to doing this with you. I like doing this crossover stuff. You're a good dude to talk to, and this is a very interesting conference tournament for both of our teams because we're going to know a lot more come Selection Sunday about both of our teams, depending on what they do in the next few days here. It could really make or break both the Hawkeyes and the Badgers, I think.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I wrote an article on Dear Old Gold specifically about my predictions for the Big Ten tournament. And, we talked a lot about this on the crossover episode last week about Iowa versus Wisconsin and how these teams are very similar. And I think in regards to the Big Ten tournament, I think they're very similar teams in that too. I consider them both to be what I would like to, coin the term pretenders in the sense that I don't know if they can go very far. I think both teams are incredibly talented, but I could see both teams bowing out pretty quickly. I mean, Wisconsin has at least a little bit easier of a slate being the 4 seed, getting 2 byes, which is fantastic. But I'm still concerned about both teams and how far they can go in this tournament.
Yeah, that second bye doesn't really do too much for me because, I've kind of bounced back and forth on this idea because even if Wisconsin didn't have the 4 seed, they would have the 5 seed. And they would have to play the winner of Nebraska and Rutgers, which is hopefully a team we'd be able to take care of, no problem. And then we'd have to play Maryland either way because Maryland is probably going to beat that team.
Yep.
So either way, we're going to have to get through Maryland, and I'm just not sure how I feel about that one. And then beyond that, Michigan State is waiting for us. So if I don't know how I feel about that game either. That Michigan State's probably the favorite to win this by a long shot, considering what they just did to Michigan. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Vegas odds, I think, has Michigan State as the, top team to win, Michigan as the number 2 team to win, and Purdue as the number 3 team to win. And then from there, it's a pretty big jump to every other team. I think Wisconsin's obviously 4th, but they're a little bit further away and a lot worse odds, and according to Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I do agree with that. I think the Wisconsin-Maryland game will be really interesting. Bruno Fernando is a big-time dude who's athletic and physical. And I think we talked about this on the last show, but Ethan Happ is a very technically sound guy down low, but when he plays against guys like Bruno Fernando, that's not exactly going to help him. Fernando's a beast, and I feel like Fernando can really control that game down low, unlike Tyler Cook, who was unable to do that against Wisconsin last Thursday night.
Yeah, Tyler Cook, I was shocked by how non-existent he was in that game. 0 points, for, I believe, 6 from the field. But Bruno Fernando is a completely different player. He's a pro, first of all. I'm not sure exactly what Tyler Cook's pro prospects are. He could very well be up there too, but
not as good as Bruno Fernando's.
Yeah, but Bruno Fernando, I think, he's a few inches taller. He's just that much bigger and that much more of a problem. I don't think it would be very wise if Nate Reuvers was the guy guarding him and Nate Reuvers only. I'm sure there's going to be times where Reuvers is out of the game just because he doesn't play the same kind of minutes as Happ, but they really have to do everything they can to keep Happ off of Fernando in that game. He's simply too much. He's a monster.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think from my perspective, that'll be a really fun game to watch. And like you said, that doesn't really help Wisconsin whether or not they have the 5 or the 4 seed. I personally think, Nebraska obviously just got done. What just happened? That was weird. I'll have to edit that out. Did you hear that on your side?
I didn't hear anything. No.
Oh, God. Well, then I just messed that all up. I'll edit that part out. But basically, I tried clicking on a thing to pull up the Las Vegas odds just so I had it in my back pocket. And then a video started playing, and it was super freaking loud in my ears.
Yeah. No, I didn't hear anything.
All right. Well, I'll edit that out. But like I was saying, Nebraska just got done kicking the crap out of Iowa. Nebraska's playing Rutgers, and then they play the winner of that game plays Maryland before they end up going on to Wisconsin, which will likely be Maryland. So wanted to, we talked a little bit about this before the show started, but wanted to kind of go through and just kind of go off the cusp and talk through each game, kind of give our predictions. And obviously, as we talked about, we're definitely going to digress a lot and probably focus pretty significantly on Iowa and Wisconsin, those being the two teams that we care about the most and obviously know about the most. So let's jump right into it. The Rutgers versus Nebraska game. That's the game that, as a Wisconsin fan, you should be paying at least a little bit of attention to, just because the winner of that game is going to be playing Maryland. And although Maryland is going to be the significant favorite against Wisconsin, it is a game that you should be watching out for. Personally, I think Rutgers is a very sneaky team. They're not as bad as people think they are, given their record and whatnot. They're a very lengthy team, very tall. I believe they're one of the top 5, tallest teams in the nation, according to KenPom. And I think, defensively speaking, they can stop a lot of teams. It's just a matter of whether or not their offense can get going. As we saw against Iowa, their offense could get going, and they blew the Hawks out. What is your concerns, or do you have any concerns with Rutgers?
Well, these are two very different teams. Nebraska, I feel like, is a program on a decline. Tim Miles is very likely done for if they lose this game. And who knows? There could be a lot of people on that team and around that program that are just waiting for the season to be over with so that they can get going and moving on. But Rutgers is in the exact opposite position. They're on their way up as a program. And that's a great stat. Like you said, one of the tallest teams in the country. And Wisconsin's not very tall. We just got done talking about how it's Nate Reavers who has to guard Bruno Fernando if it comes to that. And outside of Reavers, they don't really have many options because Ethan Happ is, he's great. He's whatever, but he's only 6'8", and he doesn't really play too vertical of the game. So Wisconsin, not that long of a team, not great with handling length. But Rutgers is just the kind of team, I feel like if they play a good game against Nebraska and they get a little bit of momentum going because they're like the nobody believes in us team. They can really ride that momentum. That kind of thing happens a lot in these conference tournaments. The teams that are often overlooked, you got Maryland that's already looking ahead to Wisconsin. I promise you that. And it's going to be really hard for these guys that are just 18, 19, 20 years old to really lock in and focus on this hot, motivated Rutgers team if that's who they get. And I think, if you get Rutgers winning 2 games in 2 days, there's no reason that Wisconsin's going to be worried about them too. I'm going to be worried about them. That's just naturally how it works. So Rutgers is just I feel like they're going to be a lot better next year. And they're looking for just some momentum to catapult them into next year. And just being able to rip off a couple of wins in a couple of days in this tournament could really set the tone for that program. That's kind of what I'm concerned about.
I couldn't agree more. They're definitely a team on the rise, and we saw them kick the crap out of Iowa later in the year. And against Wisconsin earlier in the year, they only lost by 5 at Wisconsin. So again, we talked about this in the last show, but the Kohl Center may not be what it once was per se, but it's still tough to play at the Kohl Center regardless. It's always tough to go on the road, and a young team like Rutgers losing by 5 points to Wisconsin is a pretty good indication, in my opinion, of how well the Rutgers could match up with Wisconsin if they were able to get to that point. So
yeah,
do you think?
And Rutgers is looking back on that too. They're like, we had these guys.
Yep.
Yeah, they're ready for it. They're looking ahead to Wisconsin. If they beat Wisconsin, and then they're in the semifinals, and who knows what can happen there. It's just survive and advance at that point.
Absolutely. The one thing I will say is that could be interesting about Rutgers. So again, looking at KenPom, their experience is they're one of the lowest experienced teams, or one of the least experienced teams in the nation. So while they have that height and they've shown that they can play in hostile environments, you always have to be concerned about younger guys not living up to the moment and whatnot. But as you said, they have nothing to lose. They know if they don't win, they're out of the tournament, but they have a good program going forward. They're going to be a scary team next year. So if they can beat Nebraska, move on, potentially beat Maryland, I mean, we could be looking at a team that makes a run here. Do you think Nebraska has a shot in this game?
Yeah, they got a shot just because, at the end of the day, like Rutgers is still a 12 seed. Nebraska is still a 13 seed. They're basically right there neck and neck. There's not much separating these teams. When you stretch it out and you look at like their seasons as a whole, Rutgers has more things going for it, but they're still not that great. And I mean, Nebraska was supposed to be really good this year. So if they can just put it together for 40 minutes, then yeah, they absolutely have a shot. I just really don't think it would be the best thing for, I guess, either program. It probably is just better for Nebraska to just kind of, get on and get over with it, and for Nebraska or for Rutgers to then keep going on. And like you said, Rutgers is playing with house money, and I think that goes a long way in these kinds of tournament settings. So I guess I'm going to kind of backtrack and say I don't think Nebraska really does have much of a shot. There's just not much that Nebraska has going for them, other than the fact that Rutgers, at the end of the day, just isn't good.
I was going to say, you're saying a lot of negatives about Nebraska here, but
yeah,
I completely agree. I mean, Nebraska just got done wiping the floor with Iowa in overtime, which was incredibly embarrassing and pathetic for coming from an Iowa basketball fan to watch. But I don't think they have a chance in this game. I think, that was an anomaly in terms of their season. Once Isaac Copeland went down, they're pretty much kind of busted. They're only playing 7 scholarship guys right now. And it's just not – it's not sustainable. Against a team like Rutgers, again, younger, length, size, that kind of thing, they have that going for them. I expect them to win that game and end up playing Maryland in the game 4 second round on Thursday. So kind of moving on to game 2 of the first round, we have number 11 Illinois versus number 14 Northwestern. For me, at least personally, the one thing I think about this game is you do have a couple stars here. You have, Vic Law, who's back for Northwestern, and you have that 5-star point guard for Illinois. I'm absolutely going to butcher this name. So if you know how to say this name, that would be fantastic. But Ao Dosunmu.
I want to say it's like Dosunmu or
Dosunmu,
something like that. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, he's a stud. So you always have to watch out for that. Sometimes, especially in games like these, when you have star players, if they can take over a game, that could be the difference between a win and a loss. Personally, I honestly don't want to play Illinois. I think Illinois could definitely beat Iowa, although they got the crap kicked out of them earlier in the season. Northwestern, I just don't think has a lot going for it either, other than Vic Law. They're a very fundamentally sound team. They're a smart team, which kind of goes with the general, mantra of Northwestern. But I think Illinois, led by Dosunmu, can really do a lot in this game.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered said it all when you said you don't want any part of Illinois. I'm sure you'd rather play Northwestern. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's because, not just Dosunmu or Dosunmu, however you say his name, but also they got another freshman, their big guy, who has just an equally difficult name to pronounce, Besanich-Vili, averaging 12 points a game. I remember when Wisconsin was playing him just because he's a bigger guy too. He's problematic as well down in the post. He's actually a pretty good scorer. Illinois, they're a lot like Rutgers. They're a team that's on the come up. They're going to be playing with house money. They got nothing to lose. Northwestern has nowhere near as much bad stuff going on with their program as Nebraska does. But Illinois is just better. Illinois should be winning this game. They're probably less experienced with their 2 of their 3 leading scorers being freshmen, but they're a more talented team. And I think those young freshmen can take over, and then you're in a sticky spot because you got to deal with that exact same problem in the next round.
Yeah, I mean, just to hit on what you said, what's shocking to me is I'm been shocked. I can't even remember how you said it. Georgie, the freshman forward, he was a 3-star recruit. So pretty impressive getting, key minutes in the Big Ten as a freshman. Obviously, Illinois' program has been down for a little bit, so it's a little bit easier to come in and make an impact, unlike out of Wisconsin or in Iowa or Michigan State or wherever you have it. But I don't want to play them. I think Illinois was struggling earlier in the season. I think they've started to pick it up a little bit better as of late, and it's a team that I don't want to face. It's a team that I really feel like would wipe the floor with Iowa in the second round. Iowa's been playing pretty poorly as of late. I think Illinois could probably do something about that. So
I kind of wanted to ask you. We didn't really get a chance to talk too much since the Wisconsin game, and then since the last regular season game. But what's kind of going on with Iowa? Because I wanted to talk. I was going to say, I think you match up well with your quarterfinal matchup. If you get that far, it'd be Michigan. But how do you even get that far? It sounds like you don't have very much hope.
No, I mean,
what's going on with them?
To be honest, I really felt like we had a tough closing kind of season, right? The last 4 games of the season, not exactly easy. You go on the road to Ohio State, you play Rutgers at home, and I think Rutgers matches up really well with Iowa. And then you go to the Kohl Center and play Wisconsin. I didn't get a chance to watch that first half of the game, trying to drive through mountain traffic and stuff, but obviously talking to you a little bit and seeing some of the stuff and watching kind of some of the highlights, it seemed like officiating has been kind of a weird issue for Iowa. Not to say that we're not getting calls, but we're not getting to the free throw line as much as we have been in the past. And then I think defensively, just significant defensive lapses. And Iowa's not the top defensive team in the nation. I think they're 220th or 230th in the nation in terms of points allowed, but they're not that bad all the time. And they played a lot better earlier in the season. But as of late, their shots haven't been falling. And then they don't get back on defense and they allow easy transition points. They're not closing in on 3-point shooters. And then everyone seems to be having a career day against them. And we talked about that too. So that part's kind of interesting. Looking at it, the Wisconsin loss sucked. I really thought they would have a chip on their shoulder having lost to Wisconsin at home earlier in the season. And I really felt like Iowa was controlling that game for the most part. They came out pretty flat in that game. Against Nebraska, I thought if they were able to turn the corner there, and for a little bit it looked like they were going to. They had a 16-point lead, and then they just crapped the bed. And so from that point, to be honest, at this point, I don't believe they're going to win. I honestly feel like they're going to lose the first game of the Big Ten tournament, and then they're going to get an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, and they're going to lose that too. And they're going to bow out of their season. If they don't, color me shocked at this point. I think most of Iowa Basketball Nation can kind of agree with that. It's been sort of a trend for Fran to have sort of that February fade, that early March fade, where Iowa teams just kind of drop off the cliff. Iowa a couple of years ago, number 3 team in the nation, All-American and Jared Utoff, lost like 5 of their last 7 games, ended up being a 7 seed and only one game in the tournament. So it's just something that Iowa fans have become accustomed to, and I just don't think they can go very far, to be completely honest. But they do have a very winnable schedule. Rutgers and Northwestern, they're not more talented than Iowa. Iowa matches up really well with Michigan too. So I think that's if they can get past that team, I think hopefully they can get up against a team like Michigan again. And I think they match up very well with them, kind of like Rutgers does with Iowa. So I don't know if that answered your question, but basically my confidence is freaking shot, man. It's been a long couple of weeks for Iowa basketball.
Yeah, the way I looked at the Wisconsin-Iowa game from last week, Thursday, was more so in the first half anyways. The second half, I think Iowa was just kind of like checked out of it. Yeah. But in the first half, they got good looks. A lot of them came from the perimeter. Like you mentioned, the free throw disparity wasn't there. I think that's mostly just because I was maybe settling, but you were still getting good looks on the perimeter and nothing was just falling. You had decent shooters taking shots, but nothing was going down. And basketball is a game about making shots. They didn't make shots, so they were in a tough spot in the second half, and they had to try to claw back. And at that point, it was too late. But I mean, if some of those shots just fall in, like you could go over the cliches. It's a game of inches. If you get this roll versus that roll, who knows how it could go. But yeah, you just really weren't getting the shots, and you could have easily turned the corner there if shots were falling early. Like I was saying, I was afraid that Jordan Bohannon is the kind of guy that just lets them go early and often, and if they go in, then instead of him missing early on in the game, that's a completely different game. You have so much more momentum going into Nebraska. You have so much more momentum, possibly even a 5 seed or a 4 seed going into this tournament if you win those games. Because you don't know what it does to the other teams. It's just you missed some open shots in the first half against Wisconsin, and that just it seems to me like it painted the picture for the rest of your season. But the good news is, though, Joe Lunardi does still have you guys in the field of 68 as a 9 seed. So I was kind of wondering, like, at what point is Iowa in trouble? But I don't think that you guys are even close to that. You're still a 9 seed, so you got a long ways to go before you get to that last 4-in stage.
Yeah, oddly enough, the loss against Nebraska didn't qualify as a quadrant 2 loss. It actually ended up being a quadrant 1 loss, and Iowa ended up moving up in the net ranking and KenPom. So I don't understand how all that exactly happened. I mean, in advanced analytics, it's a little bit tough to quantify when a Nebraska team is missing half their freaking players. But I completely agree. The one positive going into the Big Ten tournament is that Iowa's shooters kind of got going. Tyler Cook struggled again, but Luka Garza had 25 points. Bohannon had 20. Isaiah Moss, who gets pretty hot and cold, had 10, and he was actually shooting the ball. And then Joe Wieskamp had 14. So their shooters are starting to get going. I think that could be a big difference in that second round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Iowa should just be better too. Like at the end of the day, if you just want to be honest about what these teams are, Iowa should just be better than Illinois or Northwestern, and you should be getting to Michigan. Just like theoretically, Wisconsin should be able to beat Rutgers if it comes to that. But Maryland should be able to handle Rutgers or Nebraska too. So.
Absolutely. So who do you think on that second round? So, I mean, I think we've talked about this. We believe Maryland will easily beat whoever they play, Rutgers or Nebraska. Obviously, a little bit concerned about Rutgers. Iowa should, in theory, beat Illinois or Northwestern. I think Illinois causes me a little bit of panic. Northwestern, I'm not too concerned about, despite how well Northwestern has played Iowa this year. In terms of the Ohio State versus Indiana game, I think that's a really interesting one. Indiana's been kind of on the bubble and up and down all season. They do have some stud players in Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan. Ohio State also has been kind of up and down. Started out the season really strong. I mean, I believe they were top 15 and then sort of, fell to the top 25 and have been kind of on that bubble. They've, picked it up later in the season. Then they had Caleb Wesson get suspended for a couple games where they, dropped those. And then they brought Wisconsin down to the wire. So, you just saw Ohio State play. What are your thoughts on that team?
Well, Wisconsin was up by 23 in the second half before they blew it, or almost blew it, I guess. I kind of want to say that that's more of Wisconsin's doing. They kind of, it looked like Ohio State was going to go to the hack-a-half thing, but because Wisconsin knew that, they weren't passing the ball to Ethan Happ at all, and they were trying to break the press 4-on-5, and they turned the ball over a couple of times. When they were able to get into the half court, they kind of rushed some shots, and Ohio State just like knocked down big shot after big shot after three, and they got right back into it. Wisconsin just basically melted down completely. So credit to Ohio State for, I guess, making those shots and putting the pressure on them. But I think any other like slightly more composed team doesn't let that happen to Ohio State. So I don't think that I really don't think they're all that, especially if they don't have Caleb Wesson back. He wasn't back for Wisconsin. I don't know if he's still suspended, as far as I know, for an undetermined amount of time. So I would have to say Indiana's the favorite in that one, especially because Romeo Langford is, he's going to be putting on. He just put up 20 in their last game against Rutgers. He's going to be trying to show off in front of as many pro scouts as he can. And Indiana, I think, is just better. They got more to play for, I think, too.
I 100% agree. This is the team. Indiana kind of worries me. I mean, they've played big in big games. They had a couple. I mean, they were depleted by injuries earlier in the season. Juwan Morgan was out a little bit. They were just kind of struggling, and they got on a little bit of a cold streak. They lost to Iowa when Iowa was ranked. They lost to Ohio State. Minnesota is actually a surprisingly tough team. They lost to Purdue and then Iowa again. So that was 5 straight games. That's a pretty tough gauntlet they faced before going on a 4-game winning streak. This past 2 weeks, including a win over Wisconsin and a win over Michigan State. They stomped Illinois. I mean, this is a team that I'd be worried about. I fully believe they will take care of business against Ohio State. Although Ohio State needs this game, Indiana needs it just as much. If they could win 2 or 3 games in the Big Ten tournament, Indiana could see themselves in the NCAA tournament, just like Ohio State. I'll check out the bracketology right now, but I believe they're on the bubble, or if not, Ohio State's in as of right now.
Yeah, people are going to be billing this game as like basically a playing game for the NCAA tournament. Whoever wins this game is going to be said to be safely in.
Yep.
And whoever loses this game their season's over, and they're going to be waiting out the rest of the conference tournaments. But the one thing that really puts Indiana over the top for me is Romeo Langford and just how good he is. Because I've watched a lot of these other conference tournaments that have gone on, most of them being like mid-major and low-major conferences. Usually the team that has the better player wins the game. Like we saw it with Murray State against Belmont. Murray State had Ja Morant, who's he's going to be like a top 3, top 5 pick in the NBA.
Yep. And
he just took over. In a one-game setting, if you have one guy and the other team doesn't have that guy, that's the difference. And in this one game setting, I think Romeo Langford is, simply put, the difference. And they're going to win the game because of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I just looked at the bracketology. Ohio State is currently a 12 seed, and Indiana is the very first team of the first four out. So very huge game with very big implications. Another game we haven't talked about in the second round, number 7 Minnesota versus number 10 Penn State. And I don't know about you, but if I'm in the Big Ten, I don't want to play Penn State at all. I want to get as far away from them as freaking possible. They have been on a tear as of late, been playing fantastic basketball. Not something I actually thought I would ever say about Penn State, especially at the beginning of the season. Iowa played them, and they got hot from the field a little bit, but overall nothing too impressive. But in their last 6 games, they have won 5 of those games. They only lost to Wisconsin, which was a pretty close game as well. They beat Maryland. They also went on the road and beat Illinois, and went on the road and beat Rutgers. And again, Rutgers isn't a bad team, and playing, at the rack is not exactly easy. So, want to get your thoughts on that. Personally, I think this is a game where I think everyone's going to be underestimating Minnesota. I think Penn State's going to win it. I think Minnesota is a solid team, but I can't imagine Penn State not taking care of business the way they have. They have a lot of momentum coming into this game, and that's huge come conference time and tournament time. And they also have, I believe he's first team all Big Ten, Lamar Stevens. So, kind of a tough player to play when you have a strong player like that. When it comes down to it, that one player can make a huge difference.
Yeah, Lamar Stevens is the guy that gave Wisconsin the most problems when we played last. He did most of his work from the free throw line. He was just drawing foul after foul after foul. He didn't shoot too great from the field, but he's just problematic. He's a big dude, averaging just shy of 20 points a game. That's the strength from Minnesota too, is their front court players.
They're tall.
Yeah, with Jordan Murphy, and then Daniel Oturu is the freshman.
Yep.
He's a really nice player too. But Lamar Stevens is just better than both of those guys too, and they have a little bit more momentum going in, like you said. They probably believe in themselves a bit more because Minnesota was probably supposed to be a bit better than they were this year. But Lamar Stevens is the best player in this game, and if you're noticing a theme, I'm kind of going with the guy, or with the team that has a better guy. So I think we're kind of on the same page there with Lamar Stevens and Penn State.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's your X factor is, do you have the best player in the game? And I think momentum is absolutely huge, which is why I have no faith in Iowa at this point.
Yeah.
But you're right. Minnesota does have a lot of length. Looking at KenPom, they are the 19th biggest team in the country, which is, again, a huge thing to consider, especially when you have teams that aren't as big or don't play as big. Like, I think Wisconsin's not, they're not a huge team, but they also don't play very big. I think Iowa is a big team, but they don't play very big as well. Tyler Cook and Luka Garza are a little bit more finesse. And I say that in the way of, when someone starts pushing them around, they back down pretty quickly. And I think a team like Minnesota can cause concerns there, but Lamar Stevens is an absolute beast, and he's shooting 77% from the free throw line, which is pretty good for, a 6'8", 230-pound forward.
Yeah, that's really good. And like I said, he got to the line early and often against Wisconsin. That's where he scored all of his points, basically. So, hey, if you got that in your toolbox, then you got to use it. And if who knows what the number is, but if you win the free throw battle, then you got a really good shot to win the basketball game.
Absolutely. Well, for our listeners, we're not getting too crazy here. I mean, we've agreed on literally everything we've said so far. If the Big Ten tournament actually plays out like this, that would be very crazy. But you know how the Big Ten is, and literally every game is a slugfest and a battle. So moving on to the quarterfinals, at this point, I would say we would agree that Indiana should win. Maryland should beat the winner of Rutgers and Nebraska. Penn State will probably beat Minnesota. And although I don't like saying this, I think Iowa should beat Illinois or Northwestern. So we move into the quarterfinals. We would have Michigan State versus Indiana. We would have Wisconsin versus Maryland, Purdue versus Penn State, and Michigan at Iowa. So just touching on the Michigan State, versus Indiana game, obviously Michigan State is the odds-on favorite here. Me personally, whenever I'm filling out a bracket, I don't care how well or poorly Michigan State is done. I never never count them out. I always put them somewhere in the Final Four or Elite Eight. It's something about March where Tom Izzo's squad turns it on, and they can just not be beaten. Even against Indiana with Romeo Langford, I think this is a pretty easy game for Michigan State. They're going to take this home pretty quickly and put this away pretty quickly.
Yeah, everybody's going to drum up how Indiana beat Michigan State twice this year, and it doesn't make sense to anybody how that happened. But
it really doesn't.
Yeah, especially because one of those games, I believe, Indiana did not have Romeo Langford even. So it makes no sense why it happened. So there's absolutely no reason to think it would happen again. And I have a long-running inside joke with some of my friends from school how it's impossible, or maybe impossible is the wrong word, but you don't beat a team 3 times in a row or 3 times in the same season. You don't beat a good team 3 times in the same season. So there's no way Indiana is going to beat Michigan State 3 times in the same season. Like, give me a break if you think Indiana is going to beat Michigan State 3 times. Like, come on. That's not going to happen. So no matter what you want to say about Michigan State, who I think I saw will have Nick Ward back in the Big Ten tournament.
God, he's a beast too.
Yeah.
He just tore it up against the Hawks. An absolute stud down low. Very efficient too.
Yeah, I think if they have him back and he's fully worked back into everything, then Michigan State should be able to run through Indiana, because they're not going to want to hear any of this crap. Like, oh, Indiana beat us twice. They're going to beat us 3 times. Like, they want nothing to do with that, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually talked about that in my article too. Just, you don't beat a good team 3 times. Once you got lucky, great. Second time, I don't know what the heck happened. Third time, you don't beat them again. And especially Michigan State in March, you're not getting that easy win or that bull crap win. So the next game is Wisconsin versus Maryland. And we talked a little bit about this. I think Bruno Fernando is going to be difficult for Wisconsin to play against. I do think Wisconsin has more talented players, but I think Maryland's a little bit more athletic and a little bit more physical than Wisconsin. And so for me personally, I think this is probably the first toss-up game we have on the entire slate of games. And that makes sense. The 4 versus 5 seed, we're getting into the quarterfinals. We're getting some of the better teams in the Big Ten. But if I'm a betting man, and I definitely am, I'm going to Vegas for the first weekend of March Madness, I think I would actually pick Maryland in this game. And it has nothing to do with my hatred against Wisconsin. I just think Maryland is just going to be too much down low for Wisconsin.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth over the last few years with Maryland. I've liked them, and then I didn't like them, and I thought they were good, and then I thought they were overrated. I would say they're somewhere in the middle right now. I really respect them, but I don't think they're great. I don't think they're over or underrated. I think getting a 5 seed in the Big Ten tournament is probably like spot on for them.
Yep.
But this year, just taking the 2 games that Wisconsin had against them, the first one was at Maryland, and Maryland was smoking the Badgers. And then we came back. Nate Reuvers was raining threes, and Wisconsin actually had a shot to it was either to tie or take the lead at the end, and Reuvers missed. So they ended up losing the game. And then the second one in Madison was, kind of knock down, drag out, classic Big Ten basketball that the Badgers ended up pulling out. I was pretty confident in that one just because the Badgers were playing good from the get-go. And I think that's kind of the key here, is if they can start out good against this Maryland team, then they're better over the course of 40 minutes. But they are definitely, and I'm talking about the Badgers, they are definitely more capable of just hitting the snooze button and not getting out there until the final 8 minutes of the first half. And then by then it's too late. The guy that I'm really concerned about is Anthony Cowan. We talked about Bruno Fernando already, how big he is, but Anthony Cowan is a really, really good basketball player. He's the best guard in this game. Ethan Happ may or may not be the best player, but Anthony Cowan is the best guard in this game. And if the pace starts favoring Maryland, it's going to be because Cowan's playing well. One more final note, though. I think, what is this? Their top 8 scorers, and this is counting guys that are averaging like 1 and 3 points per game, but 5 of their top 8 are freshmen. So Maryland is very, very, very young, and I don't think they are as well coached as Wisconsin, so that could go against them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm looking at it right now, and Maryland is, let me see, least experienced team in the fourth least experienced team in the entire nation.
Yep. Very young.
So, yeah, so I mean, absolutely insane. They do have that veteran presence with Anthony Cowan, and he's the guy who can make those big shots. He, to me, like Cowan to me is very much like Iowa's Jordan Bohannon in the sense that he's willing to take those big time shots. He's not afraid of shooting as much as he needs to. I mean, he's a pretty solid 3-point shooter, shooting 34%, only 40% from the field, but an absolute stud that you have to watch out for at all times. And the other guy we didn't talk about too is Jalen Smith. He's a 5-star forward. I believe he's one of the top 10 recruits in the nation. He doesn't even, he's only gotten the court. He's the fourth most, has the fourth most playing time on all the, of all the Terrapins and stuff. But when he gets going, he is an athletic stud. He's not as refined, but very, very, very athletic at 6'10", 215 pounds. So he'll be an interesting person to watch out for as well.
Yeah, he's just, length and athleticism that Wisconsin doesn't have, unfortunately. You just have to hope that his lack of refinement, like you said, is enough to counteract all of that, because frankly, Maryland should be too much to handle for the Badgers. But we've seen over the 80 minutes that they've played, probably Wisconsin has won 50 or so of those minutes, just because they crapped the bed for most of the first game. It shouldn't go that way. Maryland has more raw talent. They just can't put it all together, I don't think.
Yeah, so are you saying you think Wisconsin will win this game?
I think Wisconsin will win this game.
All right, we have our first controversy here. I'm picking Maryland.
Yeah, it's definitely not a bad pick. Probably some homerism going on, but
yeah. I'm also pretty biased too. Yeah, I mean, I would hope that if it's a toss-up, you got to go with Wisconsin. Obviously, if it's a toss-up, I'm going to pick every team against Wisconsin. So I think we're in pretty solid boat there. Game number 9 of the quarterfinals, Purdue versus the Minnesota Penn State winner. Penn State, we obviously picked Penn State as probably the team that's going to win here. Purdue's been an interesting team. Started off the season a little bit slow, and then have really picked it up late to win, or really claim the share of the Big Ten title, led by Carson Edwards. They're a team that I think is really concerning heading into the tournament. They've been so hot as of late. I want to say they've won 14 of their last 16 games. I'll double check on that, but just a really solid team overall. Again, this is one of those situations where I feel like Penn State, they have a lot going for them, but Purdue is just ultimately too freaking talented. They're not going to be able to overcome, a team like Purdue. It's just they're too strong. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. With a quick reminder too that Purdue also beat Penn State twice this year, but the games were relatively close, all things considered. One by 9 points at Penn State and one by 12 points against. Actually in Purdue. So,
yeah, Purdue's. We're going to talk about Carson Edwards here in a minute, but Matt Haarms listed at 7'3", 250 pounds. If there's anybody in this conference that'll be able to at least slow down Lamar Stevens, Haarms is one of those guys. He's just simply big, and that might be enough. He's got several inches on Stevens, but.
Yeah, he's second in the Big Ten in blocks with 2.1. Actually, I believe behind Bruno Fernando. I'll have to check that.
Yeah, and the thing that's really just going to do it for Purdue is Carson Edwards and then Ryan Klein. If I'm looking at this accurately, they shoot 36.3% from 3 as a team, which is good for tops in the nation.
That's freaking impressive.
No. Okay, that is the conference. I was unsure. Yeah, that's okay. That's the conference. Thank God. I was about to say there's no way Purdue is the best 3-point shooting team in the country. But yeah, I just didn't scroll down far enough. Okay, yeah. So that's only the tops in the conference. That's still a really, really good percentage. Carson Edwards is shooting 34%, but he's also taking 10 threes a game. So considering the volume, that's a pretty good percentage. Ryan Klein, though, is shooting almost 42%, and he's taking over 7 threes a game. That's lights out shooting. That's too much to overcome. Carson Edwards is going to be the best player in this game, and then Lamar Stevens is going to be the second best, but he's got Matt Haarms to deal with, and I don't think that Purdue's got much of a shot, frankly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then also you got to think about Grady. I think they have a couple guys that are shooting over 40%, including Grady Eifert, a reserve player who comes off the bench. He's shooting 40. 46% from three on 2 attempts a game. So, I mean, he's good for at least 1 or 2. One of those guys who you don't expect him to do much, and all of a sudden he drains that random 3 in the corner when you really freaking need a 3 and just kind of puts a dagger in your team. So I 100% agree. Purdue should win this game pretty easily and advance to the semifinals.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now it's the time to talk about your team, your game here. This is the big one.
Dude, I mean, let's be honest. If Iowa makes it to the quarterfinals, I'll call that a win. They haven't advanced past the second round since 2006. So this is if they get to the quarterfinals, color me impressed. I'll be happy. I'll call it a day. If they just make it a game against Michigan. I know that sounds super depressing for all you Hawkeye fans listening to this, but let's be honest, a chance to go to the quarterfinals would be huge, and just playing a good game against Michigan would also be huge. The nice thing about Iowa, they match up really well against Michigan. Michigan's a really stout team, but Iowa uses Luka Garza and Tyler Cook really, really well against Michigan. They have that stud freshman. I'm trying to pull up his name right now. Another name that I'm going to be struggling. Ignaz Brazikis, 6'7", 215-pound, 5-star freshman. Very good player. But Iowa matches up pretty well against him. Tyler Cook made him, not do so well when they played Iowa. John Teske, 7'1" center. He's really going to be, I think, the difference here, because correction on my earlier statement, he's actually leading the Big Ten in blocks right now. And Luka Garza is a very good offensive player, but if you bully him around, that to me is probably the biggest matchup. If Luka Garza can get going against John Teske, that'll be huge. If Luka Garza goes completely silent, I mean, he's one of those guys who either goes for 20 or 25 or goes for 0 or 2 points. So I think that's going to be a huge matchup here. Against Iowa, when they went to Carver, a lot of that I feel like was just, a lot of Iowa players made very big note of the fact that they were pissed off that Michigan knocked them out of the tournament last year. Super pissed off about that, and they were excited to play Michigan. They had a lot of pent up feelings, I guess, against for playing against Michigan. So I just don't feel like that's going to be the same case. They already beat Michigan once this season. Michigan is a better team than Iowa, but I do think Iowa matches up well. I would absolutely pick Michigan in this game to beat Iowa. I can't see Iowa doing it. Again, I'll be happy if Iowa even gets to the quarterfinals, but against Michigan, I just think Michigan's going to be too much.
See, I'm really trying to talk myself off of Michigan as much as I can, because I feel like every sign is pointing towards them to just be kind of like a disappointment in the NCAA tournament. And I don't want to be one of those guys that was just like, I should have paid attention to all the signs,
Yep. I get you.
Because I heard somebody say, this was a while ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, their big wins early in the season was against Villanova. They beat North Carolina when North Carolina wasn't looking so hot. They had a nice win over Purdue. They beat a ranked Indiana team who is far from ranked now, and that's really it.
Yeah.
Their next ranked opponent was when they beat Wisconsin in February, which was after they got smoked by you guys. So beating North Carolina, cool. Beating Purdue, cool. I'm not giving them any credit for beating a ranked Indiana team. And frankly, I'm not giving them any credit for beating a ranked number 8 Villanova team early in the season. That was their third game of the year. Villanova has been up and down, and they definitely weren't the team that they are now. It's also really hard for me to be impressed with Iggy Brazdeikis, because against Wisconsin, in the 2 games he played against Wisconsin, he has 2 total points. Now, looking at his game logs, that is far from the norm. That's definitely not what you could expect from him. But I just don't see it with the guy all the time. He's up and down. He's young, inexperienced. I just don't know. He's broken the 20-point mark in his last few games, but it's hard for me to be impressed with him.
He's also a huge volume shooter too. I mean, he's the kind of guy, if he misses, he's just going to keep freaking shooting. In some of the bigger games, he hasn't played well. He's not the person who carries that team. When they beat number 20, or when they beat Maryland a few weeks ago, he shot 36%, which is atrocious for a forward. Against Iowa, he shot 40%. Not bad, but not ideal. He shot, took 15 shots. So he's kind of one of those up and down guys, and you're absolutely nailed it. I mean, he's a younger guy too. Will he be able to handle the pressure here? And I think you make really good points. I mean, it's weird about what's weird about college basketball is you can have a ranked win early in the season and that'll carry you along. Iowa rode that wave for a while. They beat Oregon and a UConn team that people thought was better than expected. And they rode that wave to, 14th in the nation. They lost to Wisconsin, which catapulted Wisconsin up the rankings too, because, oh my gosh, Iowa's great. Wisconsin beat an Iowa team at home. This is fantastic.
Hey. We earned that. Okay, we earned that.
You earned the win fair and square, but the movement of the rankings, Iowa was definitely overrated, and Wisconsin got a little overrated too, just from beating Iowa. So I think that it's very interesting that that's kind of why, not to digress too much, but college football, one of the things I do like about the college football playoff committee is that they do value those wins earlier in the season just as much as they do late in the season. Like Iowa was still ranked, even though they were 6-3 because of what they did earlier in the season. But those teams were also valued pretty highly. So Iowa State started doing well. And I'm really digressing here, but I really like how the college football playoff committee does things. And I don't like how the rankings are typically done here, where you're giving teams a little bit more oomph for beating teams that aren't as good earlier in the season.
Yeah, I feel you there. That definitely makes sense. It's hard. It's kind of a lose-lose situation because, I mean, there were teams like if you beat a team before they really clicked, like do you get credit for beating them then or do you get credit for beating them now? Whereas if you beat a ranked UCLA or a ranked Indiana team, do you get credit for beating a ranked team then or what they are now? It's kind of hard to do it with basketball when there's so many games played. I think that's the difference between basketball and football. There's just fewer games, so it's easier to kind of like stay true to who you are in football. And I don't know, it's tough with basketball, but yeah, Michigan, they definitely rode a wave earlier, like you said, kind of with Iowa and Wisconsin. The other thing with Iowa is I think outside of Brazdeikis, Jordan Poole, he's their second leading scorer. He's nice, he's good, talented, all that stuff, but he's erratic in my opinion. He came out hot against Wisconsin. And then just cooled off in the second half and was nowhere to be found in that first game that the Badgers ended up winning. And Charles Matthews, he was the hero in the second game, but up until that point, he was kind of a no-show for them. Like up until he scored 18 against Wisconsin, he scored 11, 6, 9, 10, 7, 5. Like that sucks, frankly. That's your third leading scorer. Charles Matthews was supposed to be your best player. He's a senior. He is really good when he's hitting his shots and he's working and he's cooking. But like, if that's what you got to lean to, Michigan's in trouble. They're a great defensive team, but if they're struggling to score, I think they just don't know where to turn, and that's the Achilles heel for this team. So this is the kiss of death for Iowa.
Are you picking Iowa here though?
I'll pick Iowa if Jordan Bohannon can promise me he's going to go out and shoot early and often, and then just make some instead of miss them all. I really like the way I think Iowa is better than they've been playing. I do
agree with that. I'll give you that.
They should be better than they've been playing anyways. So, but maybe this is just me trying to talk myself off Michigan. I really think Iowa's not that bad, and like you said, they match up well. The last time you saw this team, you smoked them, and what is it? They scored 59 points. They struggled to score it. They probably didn't have anybody doing anything in that game. So,
yeah, I mean, I will say this: Iowa's defense was clicking in that game. I mean, they did a fantastic job there putting pressure on Michigan, and Michigan wasn't making the 3-pointers that they were taking. And you're absolutely right. If they're cold, Iowa could definitely win this game. And I don't disagree with you. Iowa is a lot more talented than the way they've been playing. I'm just so biased by watching them every year that they've been with Fran. They start off strong, they fail at the end, and then they bomb out of the tournament. And so it's one of those things, like, I just want to be proven wrong. It's like you don't bet against the Patriots, right? Man. I don't bet on the Hawks late this season, but I can't let you pick Iowa and I don't pick Iowa. So if you're going Iowa, I have to go with Iowa. That's like a real dick move if the Locked On Badgers host picks the Hawks. I don't.
Yeah, all the grief that you give me about the Badgers, I actually don't hate Iowa basketball as much as I dislike the football team.
That's fair.
So I don't know. I feel like everybody's just going to be writing off Iowa in this game. If, there's, I guess, a pretty significant if they even get to this point of the tournament. But I feel like people just like Michigan too much, and I don't want to buy into all that. I kind of want to get out ahead of it, and I think this tournament anyways, isn't going to go as well for Michigan.
I think, yeah. I mean, That works for me. I mean, less controversy. Again, we're both picking Iowa. So that actually would create a matchup between number 2 Purdue and number 6 Iowa in Game 12 of the semifinals, the late game of that Saturday matchups. I think we're getting pretty close on time here, but I personally, Iowa versus Purdue. If Iowa wins, God, I don't mean to put Iowa in the Big Ten championship game here but if Iowa wins those 2 games, I 100% think it's because they're focusing on defense and they're shooting really well. And when a team starts shooting well, they have the momentum and they can get going. I think they could beat Purdue. I'm not going to pick them. I do think Purdue's more talented, but I think if Iowa got to that point of the semifinals, you have to start betting on the Hawks just because their offense is definitely clicking if they got that far, and their defense is getting by. And for Iowa, their defense just needs to get by and not allow such easy transition points, especially against a team like Purdue. The one thing that I think will really kill the Hawks in that game is the fact that Purdue is a very good three-point shooting team, and the Hawks get crushed by three-pointers. Every game they lose is because teams get hot from 3. And while I'd like to say that it's just this weird coincidence, it's because Iowa's perimeter players aren't very strong defensively. You got 6-foot Jordan Bohannon who loves to take those clutch shots, but he's also arguably the worst defender we have. And he's not going to be able to close out on a guy like Carson Edwards. Joe Wieskamp is pretty solid, but he's still young. He's still learning. And then Isaiah Moss, it honestly depends on which Isaiah Moss shows up to play defense, but I'd have to pick Purdue in that game if they play Iowa. The three-point shooting will be way too much.
Yeah, the reason I like Iowa in their chances against Michigan is because Michigan might struggle from time to time offensively, but Purdue I don't think is. They're a much more potent offensive team, and I think that's just going to be too much for Iowa. So your boys get a good run here, but at some point the dream's got to come to an end. I do think Purdue would. And frankly, I think Purdue would beat Michigan as well, just because if it comes to it, Purdue is just going to try to get into a track meet with Michigan, and I think they'll win that one. So I got Purdue in the final, kind of regardless, but I'd really like to see Purdue and Iowa in that semifinal.
It'd be a fun game. I mean, St. Patty's Day, Iowa versus Purdue. I'd be having a good time regardless. I'll just tell you that it'll be a fun time.
Yeah, you're in a one game situation, to go to the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, and again, that'll be the farthest Iowa's gone in a decade. So lots of happiness there. The other game in the semifinals, we can talk about this as if it's Wisconsin because I think it's really a toss-up here. If Michigan State plays Wisconsin this game, who do you have? Do you think Wisconsin has a chance against Michigan State?
I think Wisconsin's got a shot just because of the way they play defense. They could really try to bog down Michigan State. And if they just make life miserable for Cassius Winston, then who knows, maybe that just completely shuts down Michigan State's offense. And if basically Wisconsin's got to win the style of play battle, and then they give themselves a good shot to win this game, just because frankly, they give themselves a good shot to win any game because they just make it ugly and they slow it down and they try to keep the other team. Not that they play outstanding defense and they hold their opponent to 20, but they just slow the game down so much and it frustrates the opponent. And
it make them do stupid things or put them into unfortunate situations.
Yeah,
I get it. Yeah. It's frustrating.
And we've only seen Michigan State once this year, so there's 40 less minutes for Michigan State to have on Wisconsin, which I think just benefits the underdog here. So I don't think Wisconsin wins, but they got a shot just because I think they can make it close with just about anybody in the country. Not that they can pull it out, but the way they play, it tends to keep things close.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So we've agreed on almost every single pick besides Wisconsin, and we almost didn't agree on the Iowa-Michigan game, but I just felt too wrong to not go with Iowa. We do agree then at that point, Iowa and Wisconsin would be making it to the semifinals in this, predictive, kind of discussing the Big Ten championship, the Big Ten conference tournament. But we ultimately would be putting Michigan State versus Purdue, the number 1 and the number 2 seed. We both know March is crazy. The likelihood of that happening is insane. We're going to probably be texting back and forth, and something is insane going to happen. Who knows? Maybe we see Penn State go all the way. But in this situation, we have Purdue versus Michigan State for the Big Ten championship. I think that would be a fantastic game and the right way to finish the season. We have both those teams tied for a share of the Big Ten, regular season title. So I think that'd be a fantastic game to watch in that game. Who do you think is going to take the cake in that? I mean, you have two very good perimeter players playing each other. That'll be a huge matchup. I think obviously Nick Ward down low will be huge as well to see how he can go up against Purdue. What are your thoughts on that game?
You mentioned earlier how Tom Izzo is just like Mr. March. And I think that is going to be the make or break thing here, is just because Michigan State always seems to do well in March and kind of overachieve. Even when they don't have great teams, they tend to play pretty well in tournament settings. And Purdue kind of doesn't. So who knows? Purdue may not even get that far. They may blow it to Iowa. Not to get back on that, but
Purdue, the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, I remember this was a long time ago. I picked Purdue to go to the national championship game in one of my brackets when I was a kid. And I was like, they're just good. They're really, really good. This was like around when Robbie Hummel was there and like Etuan Moore and Juwan Johnson, guys like that. And I think they lost in like the second round. And it was an upset. But it's like, ever since then, I'm just like, I just can never trust Purdue in tournament settings. So if they can even get to the championship round, I'm just not giving them the benefit of the doubt. I don't trust their coach. I just don't trust their colors. I don't trust Purdue, period. So
it's funny how those early memories kind of hold with you. I mean, that's exactly how I feel about Michigan State. One year I was like, they're not playing very well. I believe they were like a 7 or an 8 seed. And they went on a run and went to the NCAA the championship, and I was like, I'm never picking against Michigan State again. They do this crap every single year. Mm-hmm. You can't pick against them in March. So we're both agreeing it's Michigan State winning the Big Ten championship. Like I said, probably a solid chance that we are completely off when everything is said and done, just because March is absolutely crazy. But again, I would never pick against Michigan State, and it sounds like you wouldn't either.
Yeah, and it'd be really easy to figure out where we went wrong, and it would probably be if both our teams lost their first game of the tournament, and that would just shake things up drastically. So,
yeah, and those are the ones we were kind of confused on, or at least I was definitely confused on the Iowa thing. I mean, I didn't want to pick them in Game 6 in the second round. I definitely didn't want to pick them against Michigan, but you forced my hand there. So it'll be fun, man. I'm excited to watch the tournament. We'll have to do this again. Maybe do a recap of the Big Ten tournament. Maybe giving a little bit of a preview of the NCAA tournament. Hopefully, get a lot more information after this. I mean, obviously, the Big Ten could see as many as 8 or 9 teams in the NCAA tournament, depending on how people do. So it'll be fun to see. Any last second thoughts you have about the Big Ten tournament coming up? What are you excited about, that kind of stuff?
No, I'm just really curious to see how it all shakes out, because, like you said, there's a lot of teams that are going to be tournament bound, more like Ohio State and Indiana, that are going to be fighting for tournament berths. So there's just a lot of good basketball teams here. Even when you do get down to like Iowa and Minnesota, Penn State, teams like that, like those are still some pretty solid basketball teams. So there's going to be a lot of good basketball. I love watching college basketball. So this is going to be something, pretty much every game is going to be worth tuning into. So.
Absolutely. I'm very excited, but that'll do it for our show for today. Tanner, again, it was fantastic doing another crossover show with you. Enjoy talking college basketball. Hopefully, if we can talk next week and both of our teams won a few games or whatever, that would be fantastic. I think, like I said, if the Hawks win a game, I'll be lit. I'll be super excited about that. It'll be fun. But we'll have a couple more shows coming out later this week. We'll probably be doing some separate episodes. I have some stuff coming out obviously tomorrow and the following day on Friday. I'm assuming, Tanner, you have some stuff coming out as well. So make sure to follow us both on Twitter. You can find the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast on Twitter at Locked On Iowa, and you can follow the Locked On Badgers podcast at Locked On Badgers on Twitter as well. That'll give you the most recent updates, letting you know kind of when our episodes are posted and whatnot. And it's really easy. If you just subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast at, you can get that downloaded automatically to your phone the morning that it is released. So you don't have to wait for it. You don't got to check us out on Twitter, although we would love the support and whatnot. You can just download that episode directly from iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify. And then if you have a smart speaker at home, it's super easy to listen to this episode. Just say, Siri, Google, or Alexa, play podcast Locked On Badgers or play podcast Locked On Hawkeyes. That will give you the latest episode of both of our fantastic podcasts on the Locked On Sports Network. Tanner, your Twitter handle is Nestle is the name. Am I correct?
Yes.
Awesome. So
Yes.
listeners out there, you can follow Tanner at Nestle is the name, and you can follow myself at Wade_Andrew. Again, thank you for joining us for this fantastic crossover episode of the Locked On Badgers and the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. We'll be giving you some great content heading into March Madness. We're really excited, obviously. If the Hawks can win a game, I'll be pumped. Sounds like if Wisconsin can get a few games in, that'll be awesome too. And then we'll be having some fun stuff to talk about in March. Again, thank you for joining us on the Locked On Hawkeyes and the Locked On Badgers podcast. Have a fantastic day, and we'll be both back tomorrow.